This build is going to be the construction of a closet organizer. And what I'm trying to do here is to extend the depth of the closet for usable storage. What I mean by that is this shelf right here usually was, I think it was 10 or 12 inches, which brings me out to about this area. And then you have all of this dead space here. All of these items are just underneath that 10-inch gap. So I wanted to bring these out to about 24, but I also wanted to have the flexibility to potentially add, as well as to have something that was just sturdy in comparison to these shelves, which I think the max I was able to find was 18 inches at the box stores. So here we see the finished product with some of the items stored. And let's get started to see how I did this. Here are the tools that you're going to use. I used two 4x8 sheets of birch plywood, furniture grade, and I pretty much just had the box store cut it in half, as we could see right here, and then eventually I would cut for the height. I had the height about 65 inches, which then allowed me to use these pieces right here. But then since I wanted to add some additional shelves, I wind up needing a top, a bottom, and I think I ended up with 4 shelves. So definitely is going to require some wood, and I used 3/4 because I didn't want to deal with any buckling. I want to make sure that this was strong because I really didn't know how much weight I was going to need, which is why I went with the 3/4. Screws I used 1 inch, 1 5/8, as well as 2-inch screws. I know some people are going to criticize the use of exterior screws, but as I built this, I knew it was going in a closet. I really wasn't too concerned with trying to hide screws, and I'll explain that throughout the video. I also used the countersink to make sure that the screws were embedded in the wood, because I was going to use putty to cover up the holes. And then I used a 3-inch common board for the base, as well as this 2-inch board as an additional shelf support. So here we see some of those parts once again, and you can see the top, bottom shelves, as I was painting these items, are over here. And then we see the 2 sides, side 1 and then side 2. This is the top and bottom base right here. As we could see, those items are here. And then I used for that bottom base that 3-inch common board. And then for the shelf support, I pretty much just screwed in the 2-inch board, common board right here, with using the 1-inch screws, and then the actual shelf board is just resting on top of that. That was the build. And we're going to first start off with the bottom as well as the top support, the frame. So here we see the bottom, and I used 2-inch screws. As I said, I knew that I was going to end up putting putty over this and then painting. So here you could see I used the 2 screws to build this area right here, which is actually going to be the base. And then I just covered up the holes with the putty, sanded those down, put some more putty on, and then painted it white. And you really don't see any sign of the circles, from the screws that were left over. This right here is the top, this is the bottom, and for the most part what's going to happen is that bottom base is going to be here, the top base is going to be here. I'm then going to attach the sides to the outside, and then you'll see the shelf supports here, and then the shelf is pretty much just going to rest on top here. And then for additional support, I'll end up drilling 2 screws on the side going into the actual shelf. Again, I don't really know how much weight I'm going to need for this. I just wanted to make sure that I was safe. I really wasn't too concerned with trying to hide the screws. So this was a very easy build. And the video is going to walk through 2 of the phases of assembly as well as the build. Here we see the shelf being held together with clamps. Initially I was going to only have 3 shelves, and then I wound up adding another one. Here we could see the bottom base right here, the top base, and then the sides are attached. I believe the next clip is going to be a video of the build. I guess I'll start out with a frame with the 3-inch boards. I'll build a frame. I guess I'll also do one for the top. I'll put the top one right here. Then we'll take the side, attach the side to the frame with about 4 screws going in that direction. We'll get the other side, and then we'll place a top with screws going downward. Then we'll start placing the bottom shelf and put some pieces of wood here, and then that'll help hold the shelf intact. As far as the top is concerned, when you look at it, you'll see the top frame, the side. Then we'll place the top, put about a 1/4 inch gap hanging over the edge. Now when we're cutting this wood, you also want to compensate for the blade length, the blade thickness. And so I just use this line right here at the 28.5, and you want to make sure that the blade lines up after that particular line there. If you cut it here, then that means you're going to be too short because you're going to be using the, you got to compensate for the thickness of the blade. So I'm not going to use that particular line here because I already marked it out on this side as well. And I'm going to line up the teeth with that line that I have there. We're trying to make this 30 wide and 2 feet deep. So I know that I have to place these on the inside. As of right now, that looks like this is going to be 28.5. But we are going to be building this where the sides are going to be attached to the outside, because this piece right here is going to be the base. So now when we total this up, we got 30 wide total. This is just going to be the base to give it some support. And when we come this particular direction here, we're at 24 deep. I'm going to pre-drill so the wood don't split. So once again, here is the base, and I'm not going to be staining this, so I'm going to be filling this up with putty. I'm just going over this with paint. This is going to be inside of a closet, and this is going to be the bottom piece, and it's going to... Here we are looking at the construction of the cabinet before being drilled in. It's currently being held with 2 clamps. I just want to go over some of the basics, what I'm trying to accomplish here. This is going inside of a closet. I'm not too concerned about the overall finish because I know I'm going to be painting it, which is why you see the screws here. I'm just going to cover that up with putty. And I use a 3-inch base because I need this to be strong. And instead of having 3/4 wood at the bottom and attached to the side here, this is just going to give it a little bit more support. The downside is I have to factor that in when I'm doing the measurements. Again, whatever your width is, however wide you're trying to make this, you want to make sure that you factor that in when you're cutting this particular inner frame. The bottom piece is going to be right there, and that's going to give us some strength. And then when we look at the top, you have 3 options here. Option 1, as you can see right here, this top piece, which is just sitting on top, and you would screw it in from the top into the side, even if you wanted to go into that particular area. But notice that I do have it hanging over
that could be an option. Another option would be, depending on if that's something you don't want, you maybe want to have it flush. What I mean by that is just kind of coming straight down. So although this is 30 wide, it would be, if you went with the slight overhang, you know, you'd probably have a 1/4 inch on each side. So it's probably going to be about 30 from this side to this side, but the top is definitely going to be about, you know, 1/4 inch on each side. That's going to give you about a half. Before I start putting this together, I just want to give you an idea of what I'm ultimately trying to create. We see the bottom base made out of those 3-inch pieces of wood, the 2 sides that are going to be attached to that, and then we see the shelves. I haven't quite figured out the exact spacing of the shelves that I'm going to wind up using, but for the most part it's going to look something like that. And then of course we have the top portion. This needs to be assembled, removed from here and then assembled at a different location, so it's definitely going to be a little bit of an issue. And to give you an idea of a completed project, here's one that I made in the garage, and this one I was able to put doors on. When you open this, for the most part, you can see this piece of wood right here that is acting as support for the bottom shelf. And then here we see yet another. Here we see the front edge with putty that will then be sanded down to smooth down. And again, I'm not trying to make this perfect, just enough to cover some of the cracks. I'm using a 180 grit sandpaper to fill in, smooth out those holes that were used for the screws.
So here we see the finished edge, as well as all the items ready for paint, because this has to be moved to a different location and ready for paint. And you can see the edge here is definitely smooth, and that seemed to be the issue for all of the screws that were used that were then concealed with putty.
To put this together, I have all of the yellow masking tape with the measurements for where the shelves are going to be. The bottom has been screwed into the base. I also used a 2-inch screw, one in the front, one in the back here. When we come up top, I used 4 1-inch screws to attach the top frame to the side, and it's not protruding through. You have the 4 screws on the inside on both, as well as at the bottom, and 2 for each of the shelf supports. Now I do not plan on putting a back on this because this is going into a closet, but if I was, you'd have to put a groove on the side, that way the back is flush. And again, this is going on the inside. I'm not really too concerned about the finishing, just wanted to finish this up quick. I also then put a 2-inch screw to the rear, going in between these 2 screws that are for the top base. I use the countersink to get the screw flush embedded into the frame.
Here are some of the items that were addressed in the video. I used a 1 5/8 screw coming in this direction between the two 2-inch screws. And you can see that here as well as here. And then for the top, I just lined up all of the screws with the side, and then the frame using that 1 5/8 screw again. The shelf spacing is going to vary based on needs, but for the most part I use that 2-inch common board using 1-inch screws. You can see the 1-inch screws here, and then I just simply measured. This yellow piece of tape is to represent the thickness of the actual shelf, and you always want to compensate for that. And for example, for the bottom shelf, whatever that dimension, whatever that gap is, it was 10 3/4. I don't know, I can't really see that particular number there, but if it is 10 3/4 what I want, then I'm going to, from the bottom all the way up to the top of where I place this board right here, and that's going to give me the 10-inch, because remember, or the 10 3/4. From the bottom to this portion right here is 10 3/4, and then that piece of wood is going to sit right on top of that, which is 3/4 thick. So what my recommendation, if you haven't done this before, would be start from the bottom and then just figure out your space. And then once you get this bottom shelf on, then just again figure out your distance. If you wanted 8 inches, then go 8 inches, and then place that top of this particular next board at 8 inches from that bottom. Here we see the shelf before it's dropped into place, and then showing you the distance between the bottom shelf as well as the top, which will determine how much actual space you have on the inside. Here we see the shelf placed into the closet, and here we see the difference where all of these items were actually able to fit. And notice how we still have this bottom shelf, still have this, and you probably have about a foot depth from where these shoes are. And that's pretty much it. Once you're done, you can kind of sit back and just smile, because the person you choose to be with is no longer upset about the shoes getting kinked up and bunched out by just being thrown in this particular place. Good luck.